Welcome to Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto, the podcast dedicated to focusing on the truth that is always evolving within us and around us, where we explore the potentiality of truth as a highly esteemed value at a time in history when most people have more on their plates than any one human should. If you're new to me, full expression is my jam. Some words people have used to describe me range from speaker, trainer, coach, healer, writer, spiritual advisor, teacher, podcaster, and someone even called me their soul Sherpa once. I'm less concerned with titles or labels and more interested in results, change, and creating a world we want to, can, and are proud to live in. A kinder, gentler, more curious, collaborative, reverent world where people respect each other's backgrounds, experiences, and truths. They trust in themselves, in life, and recognize that we need each other. And they know how to cultivate healthy relationships to true power, not the very unhealthy kind of power our current culture is predicated upon. Speaking of our culture, there's a lot of noise and ignorance in our current culture, and this show aims to cut through that by exploring the truths of a diverse range of incredible voices. From authors, artists, creatives, and educators to activists, speakers, and those in various scientific and esoteric fields, our guests hail from cultures and countries all over the world. We post a new interview every Monday, and if you want to keep up with the show notes and quotes from our guests, you can follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth D'Alto. You can expect a wide range of topics when you tune into this show. Everything from health, communication, money, success, parenting, desire, sex, love, and spirituality, to making pivots and transitions in life, and topics related to psychology, storytelling, gender and race issues, emotional intelligence, activism, advocacy, and much more. A few disclaimers. No episode of the show is meant for everyone, and every episode is meant for whoever needs it on the right day at the right time. Not all guest views will reflect my own, and that's intentional. We don't learn, grow, heal, or improve by staying in our comfortable bubbles with all of our people who look, think, or live exactly how we do. If you love what you hear and find it useful and inspiring, the best way to show your appreciation is to share the episode, subscribe to the show, and leave us a rating and review wherever you listen in from. Thank you so much for being here with me. Here we go. This is episode number 291 of Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto, and today we have Keisha Shields on the show, and I am so pumped to share her with you. We are exploring leadership in depth in this episode, and Keisha provided some incredible distinctions for us around transparency, storytelling, and oversharing. Her big truth was around issues leaders have and the difficulty of claiming space. So we talked about different types of leaders, how people come to their true center, and the distinction between privacy and secrecy. She also shared a bit of her own story, along with her practice of being an open chapter, but not an open book, which I loved. And we also explored the value of sharing our stories and storytelling. We got into discerning when it's valuable to share the story of an experience or the story of the impact the experience had on us. We talked about the difference between healthy and unhealthy validation and determining if and when we are safe ourselves or we're protecting someone else's safety. This is a really smart, fiery, and fun conversation, so enjoy this one, share it up. And I haven't asked for this in a while, but if you listen to the podcast in iTunes, do me a favor, head over, rate the show, write a verbal review, like put that thing in writing if you've been enjoying the show. Give us your honest feedback. That not only helps other people find the show, but also helps me as well as we move forward in finding guests and creating the content here to make sure that we're providing things that you enjoy, that is nourishing for your soul, that is educational, informative, inspirational, and all of those things. This is episode number 291, so you can find the show notes with links and any resources that we mentioned throughout the conversation at untameyourself.com/291. And that's it. Let's get into the show. Keisha, I'm so pumped to have you here. So for people who are listening, something I've been doing more lately than I ever used to before is when I want to have someone on the show who I haven't really connected with, I have like a pre-show connection call, you know, because it's cool sometimes to just like dive in and explore together. But there's just some people who I have such a desire to connect with anyway. So Keisha and I did that like a month or two back. So I'm actually excited to have her here. I think you're all going to love her energy. She's really amazing. And right before I hit record on this interview, we're recording this in November. It'll air in February. So we're a little ahead of ourselves. I just realized something I want to start doing. So you'll be the first one I do this with, even though it might not be in that order as the shows go up, is I just want to ask, like, how you feeling today? How's your body? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, so that's awesome because I totally did a check-in right before coming on. Like, how does my body feel today? Right. And like, I don't know, I felt really pumped right before coming on just because there's something about when you have a genuine connection with someone,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I'm excited for a conversation, So my body's feeling pretty good. Thank you.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why I want to do that, it's selfish, but like a real big part of my work in my power program and in Wild Soul Movement is embodiment. So it's so crazy. It's see, and I'm catching myself. I was about to say crazy. I'm not using that word anymore. It's so interesting to me. We do our learning and processing in real time here on the show.
Yes, absolutely.
We're in it.
Yes.
The very interesting thing to me is the show at the time of this airing, it will be almost 4 years old. And how am I just now integrating the embodiment piece into the conversation? So I believe in divine timing. So
I agree with that.
Thank you. The first question, though, that we do always start out with, aside now from the new body check-in, is what is a truth that's having a big impact on your life right now?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. I would say one that's really been on me the last few days is this truth that I think a lot of the issues that we have as leaders or just human nature, but really for the leaders in us, is that we have a really difficult time claiming space, claiming our space, claiming our role in a space, right? And I'm finding that truth to be very intoxicating in a way.
Ooh.
Right? It feels intoxicating because the inquiry for me is why? Why are those of us who are excellent at what we do or who are really the best of the best in our natural rhythm, right? Why do we have such a difficult time claiming our role in a space? Yeah. And so for me, that's a truth that has really been sitting with me lately.
I appreciate this so much because one of the things that I always emphasize on the show, this is not a show for entrepreneurs, but topics of leadership come up a lot. And I believe there's so many contexts in which a person can be a leader, even one person in their life are a leader in all these different areas.
I agree.
I'd love to hear your perspective on that. How would you describe that? Like leadership, what that is, and how we get to lead in the different areas of our lives?
Absolutely. And one of the things I typically qualify the statement is I usually say people who identify as a leader. Yeah. Because to me, a leader is someone who has the vision and they are instrumental in making sure that that vision actually comes to life. Right? There typically are other people who will need to be brought into the equation, but the leader is the one who everybody kind of just has that understanding that they are integral to making sure that everyone works together to actually accomplish the goal. Yeah. And so whether that's in a career role, whether it is an entrepreneur, whether it's a nonprofit, no matter whether it's in your family, there are some times where people just call on you. They know that you're the one that will get it done, that will make sure that all the pieces are moving. And so that's kind of what I want people to think about, especially throughout this conversation when we speak about leaders.
As you're saying that, something that's really clicking for me is the number of conflicts that arise within families, organizations, even groups of friends, where someone actually has the desire to be the leader, but they're not the one.
Yes, I agree. And then you know what, too, as you say, that comes up for me? Or what about the person who never steps up and says, I want to be the leader, but ends up doing it anyway, because people tend to default to them.
The reluctant. That's me. That's like me every time I ever enter a situation, practically. Yes. I'm like, y'all, I'm not trying to take over. I'm not trying to be in charge, but it's just always been my energy. People naturally, it's funny. Many years ago, I realized as well, that even when I'm traveling, when I'm out and about, doesn't matter where I am in the world, people will come up to me and ask me for directions. Mm-hmm. And I just started to take that as a sign. Many years ago, I realized that so part of my energy is that I appear to feel like I will be able to help people.
Absolutely.
Figure out where to go.
Absolutely. And exactly. Even if you're inside, you're like, I have no idea, right? Yeah. It's a presence. It's just something that the people kind of know. People kind of consider you a leader. There may have even been times in our lives where we didn't even feel like a leader, but people just naturally felt a connection that you were someone who could help the goal be accomplished, So I find that interesting. Yeah.
And I don't share that to pat myself on the back. I share that for anyone listening to scan your own life and notice, is that a frequency you have? Which, by the way, no shame if it's not. But if that's a thing for you, where people are constantly like putting you in a leadership role, even just by way of asking you something because you appear to know, maybe start paying attention and own that a little bit, which I think is exactly kind of brings us back to your big truth, right?
Absolutely. And then one other thing I wanted to add to that, Elizabeth, is, or even if that hasn't been true for you, and yet you find yourself being in a position to where you're seeking a lot of advice, and yet none of it lands, right? Yeah. That might be a sign that you're actually a leader in that particular thing, right? Because you're seeking out and you're like, you know what, I feel like what feels intuitive to me feels like the better thing, right? Yeah. That might be a sign that you have not claimed your lane as a leader.
This is an amazing point. And I say this often in these conversations, there are like certain moments when someone says something that I'm like, I can't wait to get the notes, to the Instagram stories, the posts, the DMs of people being like, oh my goodness, when she said that thing, it was so true.
Yeah, because I'm guilty. Like, I think a lot of us are guilty of that. Yeah. How many times has that happened to you? Or how many times have you wanted to put something out there and it seemed like nobody was talking about that, nobody was doing that, and then a year later, everybody's doing it. You're like, wait, what? I had a year or two ago, right? Yeah. And it's a lot of, why don't we claim that, you know what I mean? And to know that's a sign that you are a leader, that you're in leadership.
Yeah. So you just said, as part of that, you said guilty. So I'm curious, what's your own personal example? When and how has that happened to you?
Okay. So I'll just pick one.
You're like, how long is this interview?
Yeah, exactly. It might be easier to talk about when that didn't happen to me. So literally, that is, I think, one of the universal issues that I have personally had. Even when I was in corporate or working a 9 to 5, even as an entrepreneur, even in activism, that has been a recurring thing because my perspective on things is often a little different. Like, it's not typically one-sided or the other. Like, a lot of us have the innate ability to see multiple sides, right, of something and it be okay, right? And so a lot of that for me was afraid to like really talk about the perspective that was different. You know what I mean, right? And like, I'm like, well, nobody's talking about this. Everybody's talking about either this or this, right? And I didn't fit in either category, right? And so I'm like, well, I don't want to really speak up or say that and this kind of thing. And so that's just kind of been a recurring thing, even in my business, right? Like now it's so popular and okay to have these difficult conversations about race, right? Or about gender issues, or about just human rights issues altogether. Just a few years ago, that was not the popular thing to do. You focused on your work, right? And your growth and your higher self, and all of that stuff, right? And there wasn't the capability to really include those other areas. And so I'm a leader in those ways, but it wasn't my business, right? And so therefore, there were times where I didn't seem like a leader much at all, right? Because the areas where I'm naturally inclined to lead were not as relevant to everybody else, right? So that's what I mean.
Yeah. And this is so interesting because in what you're saying, something that you didn't explicitly say, but that I'm hearing is online.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's hella people who have been leading in the way that you're talking about in their local communities, offline, wherever. There's so many people. I love, my friend Laren says, she didn't invent it, but I love the saying, I'm not new to this, I'm true to this.
Yes.
There's so many of those people.
Yes.
But now that we live in this digital age, it's almost like if it's not happening on social media, it doesn't count, but like it counts. And in a lot of ways it counts more. And we have to question what's happening on social media because a lot of it is performative. And I know you're not that way. I know for sure. But I think that to me, that always just feels like an important thing to always be acknowledging and remembering.
I agree with that. And like, I know, speaking of social media, on Facebook, let's say over the past 2 months, I have probably posted about 4 times saying I'm not new to this, or recounting conversations where it's come up, because now I chuckle. Like when people, and I blame myself because I didn't claim my space. I didn't claim it, right? And so people assume because they don't know about me on this grand scale that I'm somehow come out of thin air.
Right.
And it's like, no, not at all, sweetheart. Let me go back and let me tell you, about it. And so, or when they start talking with me and they're like, oh my, you can just see the look on their faces. They don't say it, but you just know this, implied thing like, oh, wow. Right. And it's like, no, just because social media is fairly new. It wasn't always around. You know what I mean? Right?
Literally like a decade old or like 13 years old, right?
And it's like we existed before then. And not only that, initially it was just for personal use, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of history that people just don't see. But I agree. I tell them, like, I'm not new to this,
Yeah, this isn't. Yeah. I didn't just get like thirsty with a platform. So I want to come back to, one of the things that you help leaders with is visibility.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time of recording this, one of our episodes that went up just a couple weeks ago was with Tanya Geisler, where we talked about the imposter complex and the imposter syndrome, where women specifically struggle to really claim and own their successes. No problem claiming and owning the failures, right?
Yep.
And so this visibility and this exposure piece that you really hone in on, I feel like is a big part of that. So I'm wondering what made you focus, because there's so many different things people can get into with leadership. Why the visibility piece? Why is that so important to you?
Well, okay, so I'm going to take it back one step, right?
Yeah.
Because I say that I don't really necessarily focus on the visibility, right? What it is I help people to come to their true center.
Cool.
Right? And the people who tend to naturally gravitate to me happen to be women who are ready to have a more higher profile presence.
Yeah.
Right? And so for me, this lane in terms of leadership, and trust me, it was a struggle, because when people typically think of women's leadership, it's training, facilitating, it's corporate, it's this, it's that. And I'm like, no, my form of leadership is helping women to speak up, to presence, to own their successes, own their truth, own their stories, right? And I had to know that's different, right? And so for me, it comes from my own experiences as well as people I know. But like for me, for example, for over 15 years, I was behind the scenes, right? Like in terms of public facing things. Now I say behind the scenes, let me clarify, because I was a COO in corporate. I've run my business for 12 years. So when I say behind the scenes, I don't mean it in a traditional sense, but what I mean is I was championing someone else's thing.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by behind the scenes, right? And for over 15 years, because I was so worried that if people knew my husband was in prison, that it was just going to destroy my reputation, everything I had worked for. People are like, how can you tell me anything, right? You have such poor judgment, or all these things, right? And that issue, that story in my life, me not feeling safe sharing that truth, caused me to work on other people's things behind the scenes, right? And so I'm like, you know what? But that yearning to know that my calling is a lot about being at the forefront so that people can see what's possible, right? Was always there. But so for me, when I say visibility, it's about feeling safe to show up and to claim space with your truth, with your story, right? And that's a big part of it for me. Like if women just want to be visible, I wouldn't be able to help with that, right? For me, it would be for the ones who they have that thing that they don't feel safe, don't know how to talk about it, don't know how to incorporate it into their work. That's where a lot of visibility work comes in.
I love this because what I'm hearing you say is there's something that someone is ashamed of or think negates all of their value and qualifications, right?
Bingo. Exactly. You feel like all this work that I've done, all the successes that I've had are just going to come crumbling down. My reputation is going to be ruined. My people are going to misjudge me. All these things, you feel like everything that you've built so far will just come crashing down, right? And it's unfortunate. And I feel like we're finally getting at a place in society, online society, let's say that, where it's becoming acceptable to speak up.
Yeah.
And to speak truth, right? It's finally getting there. However, a lot of women who are already successful in their lane are still struggling with incorporating other stories, other truths, if it's not directly related to what they have built their platform on.
Yeah. And, how do I want to say this? Here's where I'm coming from and where I'm relating. I've mentioned this on the show before. So this is a couple of years ago now. I got out of a really emotionally abusive relationship. And it was such a blessing to me that like literally right after a couple of older women who had these experiences shared their experiences with me. And these were intelligent women. Like one of the women had 2 PhDs in psychology. And that helped me so much because it was like anyone, even someone with like the most education, it doesn't mean that there's not something in your system that's going to call in an experience. And this is a little esoteric, but this fits into my worldview, an experience that your soul needs to have, like one way or another, whether that's karma, whether that's a soul contract or whatever it is. Like, it doesn't matter actually how smart you are. If there's an experience you need to have, you're going to have it. And I think because our culture is so predicated on knowledge, wisdom, experience, qualifications, like the things, the logic and the rationale, like that you should be checking boxes on a paper, that I understand the fear that people would feel like, well, then it will take away my credibility when really it actually just makes you a person.
Yes, agreed. And not only that, it actually makes you human to people, right? Yeah. That was the biggest thing for me. Like you talk about, like, we are trained that the professional skills, and that's one of the things I talk about in my work is that it's so important for me that women, my clients typically are empire builders, right? It's important to me that it comes from, there's 2 ways to build an empire. One, on what you're good at, what your expertise is. The other way is on showing up and talking about what the heck you've been through, right? Yeah. Women tend to focus on this one. And my thing is saying, you know what? You can have exactly what you want by being a leader in this issue that you have been afraid to talk about for so stinking long.
Yeah.
Right. And for me, that is an important piece of it. Like, yes, my education. Yes, my COO and corporate and, all this other stuff. But I'm getting the most traction now that I'm talking about my story.
Just being real.
Like my business is like it's taking off, right? Because so it's like there's that thing that for so long I was afraid to talk about, right? And it's because I didn't feel safe.
Yeah.
And so that's why in terms of visibility, it's important for people to understand just being visible is not as easy for some people. Some people can be visible and that's fine. For a lot of women, there needs to be a sense of safety that comes along with it.
Yeah.
Because you feel like you are exposing yourself. And so I'll just end there for that conversation.
It's such an important point. So in my power program, I do this year-long women's circle. Each season, we have a mantra for every week of the for every month. And the first mantra in every topic starts with, it is safe for me to ... Because, as you're saying, cultivating feelings of safety is just foundational. And when people try to skip that step, it's often like re-traumatizing and in some cases a setback, right? And then people skip that. And this reminds me of Brene Brown's work, who I enjoy. I don't know how you feel about her stuff, but it's just that piece of trying to hotwire connection. Because I also see people wielding their stories as a manipulation tool.
Yep. Yeah. So I have to laugh at that comment because I have had that conversation as well. It's like you see the manipulation is rampant. And that's one of the things that has made a few of the women who have come to me afraid to speak up because they don't want to be seen as manipulative. And one of the things I say, though, is that no matter what the hot way of showing up is, whether it's, the expertise or whether it's whatever the hot reason is, somebody will always use it to manipulate. It doesn't matter. No matter, that's been since the beginning of time, right? And so we have to show up and show how genuine we are, right, in that, because ultimately that's what sustains. People who manipulate are often manipulating all the time because what they're doing doesn't stick, right? People are becoming more savvy to it, and you're right. The story is a weapon, right? And you can't build anything, and you can have no longevity like that.
That's the thing. It's not sustainable anyway.
Right.
And I always remind people, too, if you're worried about being manipulative, you're probably not. Because people who are manipulators don't give a shit. They're not worrying about it.
Yeah, exactly. And then, too, I think a lot of it goes into what's your purpose? Like, why are you needing to do this thing? Like, usually that right there can offset the concerns you have about manipulation because if it's because you need, sometimes it is a selfish answer. Sometimes the freaking answer is, you know why? Because I need to free myself from this. And there is nothing wrong with that, because as long as you are continuing to walk around in bondage, you're continuing to interact in bondage, you're continuing to have conversations in bondage, everything you're building is in bondage. So it's perfectly fine for your reasoning it to be to free yourself, to have your soul cleansed. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah. So I'd love to know your quote coming out story. When did you start to share? How did it go? And so a couple things, right? I like to explore wherever you want to start, wherever you feel comfortable at this point in your journey. What was the coming out like, and how has it evolved since?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question for me because the answer is kind of like, I don't know. And I'm going to tell you why I say that.
Yeah.
My coming out story was never a coming out story until I got online.
Oh, interesting.
That's why I say that. In my life, my real life, as people say, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has been aware of this.
Right.
I've done work around this. I've spoken on stages around the country about this, right? So the odd thing is, it wasn't a coming out story until I started building my framework online.
Yeah.
So now go ahead. You have a comment about that question?
Well, I'm wondering it sounded earlier like you were saying, even in your personal life, like there was a moment like in your professional life, maybe I just misheard this, before, like when there was a time when people didn't know.
Yes. However, those people it was not necessary for them to know.
Okay. So glad
sense.
I honed in on this, because that's important. Not everyone earns the right to know your freaking story.
No, exactly. So I'm glad that you probed that. Yes. So think about how many times, if you're working at a job, not everyone needs to know everything that's going on with you, right?
Yes.
And so those people, it had nothing to do with what they needed to know. However, it was challenging at times because when you're in that position, people, I walk around with a wedding ring on my finger and people never hear about, or, never see pictures of the husband and all this stuff. And so there were inquiry was like, okay, well, especially we want to invite you all for Christmas dinner, like those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
So there were times where there were people who I would not have gone if he wasn't there, right? And so for me, right, and so for me, it wasn't as critical until the time came where I knew that I wanted to build my thing.
Yeah.
That's when the coming out story kind of needed to take place, right?
Yeah.
It's because people want to know about you. People connect with who you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was good at what I do. People knew that I was a leader in this thing, but outside in my professional life, they knew that. They didn't know all the stuff about the husband in prison or all this other stuff. And I liked it that way. Yeah. Like it got to the point, and I do talk about this seldom, but I will just be truthful here. It's truth telling, right? Mm-hmm. For a good bit of my professional life, I didn't even go by Keisha. I didn't. I went by a whole other name that I used to use. And it was because I wanted a clear boundary between my personal life and my professional life. I knew that once Google came into play, I didn't want people Googling Keisha Shields and finding out all this personal crap about me. Mm-hmm. So I intentionally didn't even operate under which is my name, right? Because I was so mindful of the concern of everything I had coming crashing down. Yeah. So to go to your question about when did the coming out start, it started when I came online, which I would say probably was close to 10 years ago in terms of my business. And it came when I was building a business like most of us do, right? Just testing out different things. And nothing I wanted to do was working. Right? Like I felt like I did the business to a T. There was a business to a T box, right? I feel like I did all of that. It was the expertise. It was what I can do, but it always felt disconnected. Like once I talked about the content, there was nothing left, right? And so I'm like, you know what? I want so bad to be able to just be honest because my experiences was why I wanted to start my business to begin with, right? And I wasn't even building friendships with people online because I'm like, if they're going to be judgmental, here comes the question. I felt like online I couldn't defend myself, right? I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't craft the narrative, right? All of these things. And so a lot of it started happening, let's say 10 years ago. And then about 7 years ago, let's say probably about 5 years ago, 2013, right? I hired a coach who I was like, this is going to be the one that is going to really make it so much easier for me to just tell this thing, right? And so I started doing it. And so one day we had a call and I just like blurted it out. I was like, you know what? I'm going to tell y'all right now, like, now, mind you, the call had like 4 people, like 4 correctional officers, 2 people who worked in law enforcement. There was like one body who was like some kind of lawyers. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to tell y'all, this is what it is. And nobody freaked out because these were people who I could see myself building relationships with. That's why I was like, you know what? This is it. I'm going to just do it. I'm going to do it now. And that's all. And people were like, oh my God, you are freaking amazing. I had no idea you've been to, oh my God. And it's just like, and I was so upset. I cried and I was like, nobody cared. I was so upset that nobody took it negatively.
Because you were expecting a reaction.
All these years, I never spoke up. I never shared this little piece of my life because of this fear. And I was so upset. I'm like, all these years, I could have been building what I wanted. And nobody cared. Like they loved me even more. And so I did that within that circle. And then when I decided to pivot and started to own more of what I really wanted to do, the need came up again. And then I'm like, I'm in a new lane. So let me not speak out. I don't want to like, that kind of thing. And so then I started to go back and talk about the expertise, right? That didn't last. It worked out, but it felt so disconnecting. Then I also, it was like that. Whenever I go to switch into a new lane or a new role, it's like, wait, it's going to come crashing down. And so for me, I've found, so it's been incremental. And so when I spoke at Gaia, which is where we met, earlier this year, it was interesting because I'm like, no, that's not the first time I've spoken that story. It has been in front of a corporate entrepreneurial audience, right? But it's been whenever I'm pivoting into a new lane, like those fears come up again. I was like, oh no, I can't craft the narrative. I can't stop people from thinking the wrong thing or assuming, because I don't fit the stereotype of what people think. There are so many stigmas, so many stereotypes associated with let's talk about just the prison wife aspect of it, right? There are so many stereotypes of what that looks like, what that sounds like. And I don't typically, aside from being Black, I don't typically fit into the stereotypes, right? And so a lot of that is that. And so it's been a continual process of when I go into a different lane. And when I say a different lane, what I mean is I'm starting to claim what I actually want to do. Because I've been claiming watered down versions of what I want to do, right? What I feel is acceptable. And so it has been an incremental process over 10 years of being online where I blurt it out. And then when I go to pivot and go to the next level, it's like, back to, corporate Keisha or, that kind of thing. And so that's how it's been.
Yeah. And I think that it is the natural desire to go back to something we said earlier, to establish the safety first, to ensure that when you are ready to open up, it is received in a way that you get to determine in a little bit of a way, right? Yes. Not that you need to control everything, but it actually feels kind of self-honoring to me. Quick break in the show, everyone, to introduce you to a new sponsor we have. The name of the company is Pruvit. That's Pruvit. And they are a company that produces an extremely high quality, therapeutic grade ketone supplement. If you are familiar with the benefits of a ketogenic lifestyle, what the process of ketosis is in the body, or supplementing with ketones, you already know what it is. If you don't, you can find information by going to www.elizabethdialto.experienceketo.com. So that's elizabethdialto.experienceketo, which is KETO.com. Now, I want to give a couple of disclaimers here. I was introduced to this very synchronistically and serendipitously by a dear friend of mine who lives in the UK. She was visiting Los Angeles back in December. I didn't even know we were going to be having this conversation. And she just started telling me about this company that she was working with, this supplement that she was taking, and all the benefits for her in her own body with her own health. One of which was clearing up some brain fog. I have been dealing with some inflammation and some digestive issues and just some very minor health things, all related to inflammation over the course of the last few years, and really trying to treat myself naturally without taking any medications or having to do any major Western medicine protocols. And as well, going back and forth with my diet and food and how I want to eat, whether I want to be eating more meat products or less meat products and things like that. And so I got some samples of this, and I've just really enjoyed the energy, the impacts it's having on my body. It's definitely helping with the inflammation. The other disclaimer I want to give is if you go over to check that out, yes, I do get credit if you make any orders or if you want to join as a promoter. It is a multi-level marketing company. I'm not all in on the whole multi-level marketing thing, but that's just the way it's set up, and I use the products and I wanted to share and talk about the products. The other thing is some of their messaging is around weight loss and fat loss, so I need to be really clear and state that that is not my messaging. You all know I could give a shit about losing weight. I'm not into that fat phobic kind of messaging, but I really am into the convenience and the benefits of getting the body in a state of ketosis, which has myriad health benefits. If you're curious about it, look that up, Google that, ketosis. It's really useful for all kinds of disorders, diseases, and stuff like that. Obviously, if you have some serious medical things going on, you might want to check with a medical professional first. But so far, I'm really appreciating the company, the products. I'm getting some great results in my own experience. So just wanted to share that up with you all. And again, take it with a grain of salt. Try it out for yourself if you're interested. And if you're not, totally cool. So that's that. Again, it is ElizabethDialto.experienceketo, which is KETO.com if you're interested. And back to the show.
I think in a way, because I think the question we have to ask ourselves is this safety for me or is it for them?
Yep.
Because there have been times where I felt perfectly safe, but I was too worried about the judgment that would come and what people would think and if they would feel safe in the conversation. So I feel like when it's about our safety, then absolutely. But when we are suffocating ourselves intellectually, emotionally, for someone else's perceived safety of our truth, that's when we start to do ourselves a disservice. And that's when we don't claim, we don't own. And then before you know, we've fallen into the background again.
Yeah. This is a great point, and it brings me to something that I had just written down while you were talking before that I wanted to re-emphasize, which is the distinction between like hiding and keeping a secret and just privacy and using discretion. And you used the word mindfulness, and I feel like that's the door that swings open or closed to determine which one you're doing.
Yes. I agree with that. And you're absolutely right. And I'm happy that you mentioned that distinction because in my work in particular, I do talk about how a lot of the clients, a lot of women who come to me, not even clients, just women, peers, colleagues who come to me, often there is a feeling that they need discretion and privacy. And for me, that's where the idea of feeling safe comes in, right? And it's not about the secretiveness of things, because secrets kill. I remember my husband told me that one day when I literally just broke down and I was like hitting a rock bottom, but it was like an emotional rock bottom, right? And I'm just like, I cannot do this anymore. Like I'm suffocating my own dreams because I'm so worried about the fear of being judged, right?
Yeah.
Like growing up as a people pleaser, I was the good girl. I was the good girl out of the bunch. People to this day are still like, yep, that was you. I was in compliance. Right? You didn't break protocol. You sat polite and nice and smiled and this and that and all that. And so it was always that, well, I don't want to be perceived as this thing. And I just had a breakdown one day and I was like, this is not right. This is my life. Like, why am I so feeling suffocated by the fear of what people who are ultimately not even gonna, and it was the people who don't even matter. I say that all the time. We are so worried about the people who don't matter to what we're trying to accomplish, right? And he told me, he was like, you know why? He said, because secrets kill. And I just remember just bawling my eyes out because he was right. And it was killing me. Right. It was killing me. It was killing my dreams. It was killing my income. It was killing my vision. It was killing Keisha, right? And so a lot of it is that it was like that need to feel safe, like my privacy and discretion was there as I was getting more comfortable. But it got to a certain place where when I was comfortable, I was more worried about other people's ideas of safety, right?
Yeah, and this is an important point. Thank you for that. And I have, I've worked with clients, actually a couple clients this year in 2018 who have a lot of money. Whether it's because of a business they run or family money or whatever. And I've had friends in the past as well who come from like the type of money that most people will never see in their life and like can't even fathom having access to. And it's interesting to see how people navigate who to tell that to or not. And I've had people feel like they're hiding something. And one client in particular, I remember just like the look on her face when I was like, hey, that's not everyone needs to know that about you. It's actually not a safe thing to share with a lot of people because of a lot of people's funky relationship to money. So, for anyone listening, whatever might be your secret, a lot of like your relationship to the secret largely might have to do with people's relationship to the topic, right? So like what you're talking about, hiding like a husband in prison, so much stigma around what that could possibly mean, any moral implication potentially that people might just put on to you, depending, not knowing, assumptions, all kinds of things, right? And so that was something super eye-opening. I'm like a pretty transparent person, but I've not had a lot of things in my life with a lot of stigma attached to them. Right. And so that's something I really learned through some of my clients and friends over the last several years around, again, what we keep to ourselves because it's just appropriate. And what we share, and not like guilting ourselves or like the interesting obligation we might feel when it's not there. So
yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to say one thing about that, Elizabeth, is I completely agree. Like, a lot of people, like, you're very transparent. A lot of people say I'm an open book. I'm not an open book. I'm an open chapter. If this is a chapter of my life that I'm really open about, I'm very transparent about that particular chapter. Once I've moved on to the next chapter, you can hedge your bets on whether or not I'm going to be open about it. Maybe, maybe not, right? It's just a boundary for me. Right now, this whole prison thing, perfect. I'll talk about it. I'm moving on a lot from that, right? So once I've closed that chapter, I may or may not be as open about it as depending on what's happening, right? But in this space, I'm very open and transparent about it. And what I was going to say was one of the things that I do teach, or when I'm just talking about this idea of our stories, our experiences, I'm really talking about the ones that are the game changers for you.
Yeah.
And not everything we've been through will be that. I knew that this experience of me having a husband who was in prison, it wasn't the fact that he was in prison, it was that he was a long-term sentenced person in prison, right? At one point, I couldn't answer the question, oh, when is he coming home? I don't know, right? It was a lot of the things attached to that. And I knew that this experience was integral to the ultimate higher calling that I have, because so many people are afraid of what other people will think. They're afraid of the judgment, right? So that's why, because I could have easily built the business I wanted without even talking about this story. I easily could have, right? But I knew that this story, this experience was a game changer to my vision, right? Yeah. There are some stories that are just private. And the other thing I was going to say about that is I tell people, you need to be able to discern whether or not it's the story you need to tell or the experience of how the story impacted you that you need to tell.
Can you say that again?
Yes, you need to be able to discern whether or not it's the story that you need to tell or if it's the experience that the story has had on your life that you need to tell. Like, for example, I could easily say, I had a husband in prison and all this and that, but if it was not integral to, if it wasn't a game changer story for me, I could easily talk about. Instead, I could say, you know what, for 15 years, there was something in my life I didn't talk about. I didn't talk about it. I hid it behind the scenes. I built this and that. And if you've been through that, just know that these are some of the things you can do to get out of it.
Yeah.
The same outcome, but I knew for me, right, that it was the story at that point. There are some other things I've been through where I don't talk about the story, the experience. I talk about the effect that experience has had. And that is another way that you can feel safe until you get to that point where you feel like, you know what, now the story is ready to be present. You can still talk about it. You can even get detailed about it, and a person will not have a clue until you feel safe talking about it. So be able to discern the difference. But it's important that you are telling it. It just doesn't need to be the story, or you need to talk about the experience.
So I'm having a moment. Anyone who's watching, not listening, might be able to see that I'm a little teary. I've cried on the show before. But over the course of the last few years of sharing both the story and the experience of coming out of that abusive relationship with a person who is very narcissistic, I was navigating it, in real time, this exact distinction, which I've never articulated before. So I'm like kind of gushing with a big load of gratitude for you about how much of the detail do I share, how much of the experience and the impact. And what I realized and what I did and what I will continue to do is share both, because the feedback that I've received is in sharing a lot of the actual detail of the story, people are able to recognize that they're in an experience that is dangerous and unhealthy for them. To go, oh, that's what's happening. You know what I mean? And
yes.
And that was that way for me because someone shared a story with me, which opened my eyes to go, holy shit. Mm-hmm. That's what – it didn't happen until after I was out of that relationship. And people who listen regularly know the story. But I needed someone to share their story with me so that I could see what my experience even was. Mm-hmm. And then the experience of the healing and just like kind of just – I love that Ram Dass quote, we're all just walking each other home. Me sharing my experience has been my way of also through the show and through the platform, we're just walking each other home. And then people share resources with me. It's been a very like mutually beneficial experience and like layers and layers and layers of healing, which when you've been with someone who's narcissistic and you're sharing the experience, which you have every right to share your own experience, they don't like that very much.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
So there has certainly been some pushback, which led me to have to like completely block and delete that person from my life in every way, because no one has the right to say to you that you can't share your own story.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I'm just pausing for those of you who are listening, because I feel like this is a truth that I feel a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things as well, Elizabeth, that comes up when client work is people get nervous when they feel like their story is also telling someone else's story.
Yeah.
And then you can find yourselves pulling back or shutting down because of what the other person may think, right? Yeah. And it's like, it's such a disservice to ourselves because, as you said, no one has the right to be able to tell you that you cannot tell your experience or your story, even if it does include them. It is your truth, right?
Yeah.
And so I love that you said that, and I hope that for anyone watching or listening, they feel comfort in that experience, because I feel that it's so prevalent for a lot of people. And, you talked about being with someone who's narcissistic, and I have not had that in my love life, but I had a boss in corporate when I was an exec who was classic NPD, right? Classic narcissist. And it was like, I remember getting to a point to where I told my husband, I said, I feel like a battered wife when I go to my job.
Yeah.
Right? Like I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Right. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I didn't tell that, oh, this is from my boss, but I did talk about, being in a relationship with someone who's narcissistic is this, and this, but I didn't go into the private details because it wasn't relevant to what I was doing, but the experience was so important to share for other people. And so I agree with you on that. I share the same sentiments as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it is tough, like even, people, I remember hearing this many years ago, someone saying, there's certain stories I can't share until my parents die. Right. And I can relate to that in some ways because the thing is, this is kind of like what we were talking about earlier. If you're worried about manipulating people, you're probably not because you care. Right. And it's the same. Like if you're concerned about throwing people under the bus, that's clearly not your intention.
Yes.
Or you wouldn't care. You know what I mean? And like that's one of the pushbacks I received at some point. Someone accusing me of like being out for revenge. And I'm like, no, like it's literally not about this person. It's about my story, my experience that's super relevant for so many people in the friggin' audience. And also, like you said, healing for me to share, healing for me not to hide, as well as important for me to come back into integrity, because the experience that we projected about our relationship while we were in it, which I thought was real, ended up not being real. And so to feel like I participated in a lie, it's not in my DNA to not clean that shit up afterwards, you know?
Wow. You know how like your heart starts like when you said that, you get like that. Absolutely. Wow. And for you to be able to circle back and come and just expose yourself, expose the new knowledge that you had, the new frame that you had to talk about it, you know, and oftentimes when we're in the thick of it, it's very challenging to talk about it. Like I tell people, if my husband was no longer in prison, I wouldn't even have a problem telling the story.
Yeah.
It's because it's a still relevant current thing that I'm in. So it's so much more tender to talk about. It's so much more important that it is sacred, right? It's a sacred experience. And we have sacred experiences, whether we know, whether they're harmful or not, because we often don't know that they're harmful until something major happens.
Totally.
And we get like yanked out of it. And it's like, whoa, what just happened, right? And so, but when you are in the thick of it and you're talking about it, then when you get a chance to get out of it, to be able to circle back and be able to tell your truth about it, and with the guise of using it as a tool for healing yourself and to truly help someone else, it's a very therapeutic, and I think also it can be a profitable way of being. And let me qualify that statement.
Yeah.
When I say a profitable way of being, I'm referring to you open up your ability to get opportunities that you may otherwise have never been able to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because someone hearing that will go, oh my gosh, can I connect with you about this thing, right?
Yeah.
And so for people who you feel like the story, the truth, the perspective can be a game changer for you, it's important to know that when you are at a place where you feel safe enough to do it, it will change everything for you.
Yeah. And, listen, this is really true because fairly often when I'm inviting people on the show, it's because there's something in their story that I'm like, ooh, our audience would really benefit from hearing that. Yes. Or I'm sure there's people in my audience who can relate to that, And again, I really am coming back to this distinction you've made over and over again. There's the story and there's the experience, right? There's experiences. Even this year in 2019, there's experiences that I'm so curious about that I don't have experience with, right? Like I'm so curious to get more people on the show to talk about non-heterosexual relationships, like being transgender, like these things because I think it's so important to expose people to other people's lived experiences, not to tokenize them, but to humanize them. I think that's the difference, right? We're not here to tokenize, we are here to humanize. Then it becomes this thing that's not like super foreign and out there. It becomes this thing that like you sat in your car, you heard someone's story, you felt connected to them, you realized they were a person. It's not like this mythical experience now.
Absolutely. And the key thing, exactly. And one of the key things there is back to that idea of you may not relate to the story that they are articulating, but if you listen closely, you will most likely be able to relate to an experience that they have had in living that truth and living that story. And so we really do need to be open to that. Like people laugh at me because I'm someone who I love having like real conversations. Like I can probably talk about most things with most people, right? And be okay.
Same.
Right? Okay. I'm losing air quotes for those of you who can't see me, because there is something there about exposing ourselves to a different perspective.
Yeah.
And also by exposing someone else to a perspective of ours, right? And like you said, it's not about maybe you don't have a husband in prison. That's okay. But maybe you can relate to the fact that you have spent a decade or more or 5 years or more afraid to share something about yourself that you know will change everything for you, right? Yeah. And so as you're listening to other people, as you are having conversations with others, I want you to not focus so much on the story, but reflect on can I relate to that experience in some way? Because it will blow your mind when you really look at that distinction for yourself.
Yeah. So as we start to wrap up the conversation, the thing that I'd love to spend the rest of our time on is that safety piece. And so the question I'm about to ask you, I know there is not like a hard and fast black and white answer for. So, but based on your expertise and your experience in your own life and with people, how can people begin to know when the sense of safety is established enough that they can share without harming themselves?
I would say the first thing I would say is to that question that I posed earlier is, at this point, am I not feeling safe, or am I worried that someone else receiving the story may not be feeling safe? Because that's important, right? Because if you're at a place where you're like, no, I don't feel safe yet, that's a clear sign that you're not ready to give the details, right? But if you go, well, actually, I think I might be okay so long as I have some support, right?
Yeah.
But then if you still feel like safety is an issue, then I need you to look at it. Well, am I actually worried that the people receiving this might feel some kind of way about it? That's a big telltale sign.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I say for people is, test it out like this. When I'm working with people, whether they're clients or not, I usually tell them this. This is one way you can know. If I tell you, write a post about this thing, right? Write up whatever you want to say. Don't judge it. Don't edit it. Just write it. When you feel good, hit submit. Tag me in it, and I will come and I will actually show my support for you. I will validate your experience with my own, so that you know that you will have someone who is celebrating you for doing that.
Yeah.
If I tell you that and you are like, okay, that's a sign that you don't yet feel safe. Because a lot of the things one of the biggest issues that we have is we are worried about the fear of judgment, of what people will think, right? And so long as that is the defining issue, that safety won't actually occur.
Yeah.
If you were to post something that is terrifying you, but you knew that someone who knows you came through and went, oh my God, you did it, you would feel like, you know what, I can do this. You're worried that everybody is going to have a negative judgment about what it is that you're saying. And so it's important to ask yourself that question. Elizabeth, I'm going to post this thing. I'm freaking out about it, but it's my truth. Would you be willing to come and read it and give me some support, right? If you tell me yes, and I still don't feel comfortable doing it, we have a safety issue.
This is a great point.
And what may need to happen is maybe you need to start talking about the experience and leave out the details of the story.
Yeah.
That's usually a place to do it, because it's calling for you to talk about. It's calling to be shared. The story is ready to be claimed, right? So you need to start talking about it, but leave out the details or relate it. Take it off of you. Be like, you know what? Have you ever met someone who blank, 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 right?
Yes.
Talk about it. Or just talk about, like, for example, I'll tie this up as well. Some of the women who come to me one of my most recent contacts, again, were sex workers. And that was it's a big stigmatized thing, right? And being afraid to talk about it because you're afraid of what people will think, right? So if that is you, or just put your place hurdle story in there, right? Go, you know what? There are some really amazing people who live lives that we could never relate to or never understand, so we think, right? There are so many women who are in sex who do whatever it is, frame it as a story, frame it as a way to articulate your perspective. And you don't even have to talk about the fact that it's you. The more you start to talk about or share information about the topic, you'll slowly start to weave in pieces of your truth along with it, right?
I love how you're giving people ways to dip their toe in the water. Because I feel like a lot of irresponsible encouragement says, dive into the deep end, leap and the net will appear. And honestly, sometimes that's the way to do it, rip the Band-Aid. But sometimes it's just not. And you also said something that I want to emphasize, which is so big. You mentioned having support and being resourced. And especially if people are going to share something online, this is something this year I've learned a lot more patience and restraint around what I share and when, because any given day, any given thing that someone shares specifically on the internet, it could go viral.
Yes.
And if you do not have the support and if you are not resourced to handle that, there's also an element to when you share anything, you're responsible for then holding the space for the conversation.
Yes.
And if people are going to lose their shit in the comments, it's one thing that like people might be supportive or abusive to you, but then if they're starting to be abusive to each other, that's your territory.
Sure
you have a responsibility. So if you know that you can't hold space for that, you can't be posting shit.
I agree.
And that's something that I really learned, like depending on what I've gone, even like creatively, like right now at the time we're doing this interview, I'm in a deep creative process. And so there are things that I want to say that I want to post that I just can't for like a month because I don't have the space.
Yes.
I don't have the space for it.
Got you. And then one thing I would like to add to that, Elizabeth, is, and then when you do create a boundary in your post, right? I see you do that. Yeah. I see you do it. Like, look, I'm not asking for your opinion. I don't care what you think. I don't want to hear the next. Like, honestly, create a boundary.
Yeah.
And if your issue is not worried about the people in the comments, it's worried about what they're going to say about you.
Yeah.
Tell your truth, post it, and walk away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Walk away.
Get the hell out of there.
Go do something, because the moment you sit there, the first little red bubble that pops up saying there's a notification, you're going to be spazzing out, right?
Yeah.
But exactly, do it and walk away. But if you have a charged topic, you have to be prepared to navigate whatever happens.
Yeah.
And you can help that by having clear boundaries.
Yeah.
It won't prevent it, but you can definitely help that.
For sure. Yeah. I forget. I don't even remember what it was the other day because I literally do this all the time. But I was like, by the way, like if you disagree with me or this doesn't align with your beliefs, that's cool. Just keep scrolling.
I remember.
Just keep scrolling.
I remember reading that.
You really don't need to invest any time in trying to convince me of anything other than this.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, and it's important because then people go, okay, well, they
not
will
the
scroll
place.
on by, right?
Not the place.
So it's important to just say that because people always have an opinion.
Yeah.
A lot of the times they're ill-informed. Let's just be honest about that, right? And so that's part of the territory with online. That's why I often differentiate being online versus not online, because it can go viral just like that.
100%. 100%. And listen, we live in a time where we're integrating this. Like online is just a thing. Like I was saying this to someone recently. I don't remember if I've said it on the show yet, but the same way that like at some point in history, electricity, TV, phones, cell phones got integrated into our lives, social media is just getting integrated now.
Absolutely.
There were a couple of years where I struggled with, how do I want to be with this? But I'm like, oh, it's actually just here 24/7 now. So it's integrated. It's just here. It's here now. It's not a thing that isn't like we turn on the lights every time we walk in the house. Like, it's like social media has become just like that.
Absolutely.
Technologically speaking.
I did horrible at integrating social media. Like I finally am consistent with even logging in. Like I will get over it so fast. Like literally one day I was on Facebook. I logged out that day. It was 3.5 years later before I came back on.
That's amazing.
Like, because I was like, I don't want this to control my very being, right, of everything. But now it's so difficult, you know?
Which, by the way, I'm not saying that everyone has to integrate it, but I'm saying if you are using it in any way, then integrate it into your life.
Especially if you're using it to speak truth to your power.
Exactly. 1,000%.
That's critical.
Yeah. I mean, if you have any kind of a platform, that goes without saying. So Keisha, you know how much I appreciate you. You're so fun. I can't wait till we can get some hang time in real life again.
Definitely.
Tell the good listeners where to find you.
You can go to KeishaShields.com. You can also check me out on Facebook at facebook.com/Keisha P. Shields. And I'm on Twitter under the same. So twitter.com/Keisha P. Shields.
And we'll put links to all those things in the show notes. Thank you again so much.
Yes.
Thank you for that beautiful moment where I got to anchor in something that was deeply meaningful for me as well.
Yes.
Everything you shared, your truth, everything you stand for, your amazing energy. So awesome. For people listening, share this. Use this as a conversation piece with your friends, with your family, with your people who you are navigating truths with. This is a great one to listen to more than once and use as discussion points for conversation. So
yes.
One more time, thank you so much, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
To do these days.
What is mine to do? Well, I love how you said that. It's definitely going broad and going deep. Mm-hmm. So my mission in the world really is to uncover myself and my identity and my gifts in the world, and to share that with others through yoga and through this journey of, a yogic practice is really using breath, is using mantra, mudra, ethics, all of these different tools, the physical practice, to peel back layers to our true selves. And so the more that I can do that for myself, the more that I am showing up to help and support others do that. And it's really apparent to me lately how I'm just so not alone and how interconnected I am. And it feels very, just at the end of 2018 and now in 2019, like this movement where in the past, those of us who are brown and doing yoga, there was room for maybe one on a summit or on a conference or, in a consulting gig. And so there was a little bit, in past years of not intentional competition, but, not hey, I'm calling up all my friends and bringing them along. And now it's happening. And so my role is also, because I do get access, I'm lighter skinned, I have some mixed privilege, right? And so because I'm Indian and British. And so my role is in part to, and